Hi, my name is Iman from the Immigrant Resource Center of Maine. Instead of monthly trainings, we will switch to weekly community education videos as part of a new monthly topical series. This month, we are focusing on raising awareness about mental health within our immigrant and refugee community as part of May's Mental Health Awareness Month. Our focus this week is on explaining mental health and how it manifests in our immigrant and refugee community. Mental illnesses occur as conditions that profoundly impact an individual's ability to operate within their daily life. It can then negatively affect the way one thinks, feels, and behaves. Consequently, mental illness does not discriminate when it comes to age, race, ability, or socioeconomic status. Mental illness has many causes, from a chemical imbalance in the brain to one's current state of being. While mental illnesses can be very disruptive, it can be either temporary or chronic. An example of a conditional mental illness is SAD or seasonal affective disorder. On the other hand, chronic or long-term mental illness is bipolar and schizophrenia. To keep one's mental illness under control, one must pay attention to their mental health. Mental health involves maintenance of one's well-being on an emotional, psychological, and social level. Stable mental health is vital towards building a healthier, more stable life, relationships, and coping mechanisms. If an individual dealing with mental illness has poor mental health, they're left at risk for other issues, such as depression, which leaves sufferers at risk for stroke, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. If left untreated, those who have serious mental illness may also deal with the following: disability, unemployment, substance abuse, homelessness, jail time, and even suicide. The World Health Organization found that almost half of the U.S.'s leading causes of disability are the product of mental disorders. Moreover, those who deal with a chronic or temporary mental illness may possess a solid mental health routine that permits them to have periods of well-being. According to the National Alliance on Mental Health, mental illness affects millions of Americans each year. While 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience some form of mental illness each year, 1 in 25 U.S. adults experience a critical form of mental illness. 1 out of 6 young Americans between the ages of 6 to 17 experience mental illness 1 out of 6 times each year. When it comes to young Americans, at least half of all long-term mental illnesses are diagnosed by 14 years old, while up to 75% of long-term mental illnesses are diagnosed by 24. It was found that almost a fifth of U.S. adults who experienced mental illness also suffered from a substance use disorder in 2018. As a result of mental illness's prevalence in the United States, suicide is one of the top leading causes of death for Americans under the age of 34. Moreover, unemployment is higher among U.S. adults who have a mental illness at 5.8% compared to those who do not at 3.6%, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. On the other hand, American high school students who suffer from depression or other mental health issues are more than twice as likely to drop out of school compared to their neurotypical peers. Out of Maine's 1.4 million people, about 4.4% of Mainers deal with some chronic mental illness, like major depression or bipolar disorder. A little over half, at 54.9% of Mainers, receive some form of treatment from a public system or a private provider. As a result, 45.1% of Mainers receive no form of mental health treatment. Despite these stats, Maine provides the 10th best access to mental health services in the United States. Even though Maine has been making improvements with the mental health system over the years, there are still issues that need to be sorted out within the state. When seriously mentally ill Mainers continue to go untreated, they're 3 to 4 times more likely to commit violent acts than the general population. There are currently thousands of mentally ill adults who end up becoming homeless or prisoners because they didn't receive any or little mental health treatment. On the other hand, those who are considered too challenging to deal with within the mental health system are often transferred from one mental health facility to another. Since taking office, Governor Mills and other Maine lawmakers have taken specific actions to improve Maine's mental health system. For instance, Governor Mills approved Senator Breen's bill dedicated to improving Maine's mental health services to accommodate and help as many Mainers in need. Governor Mills has also begun working towards improving Maine's mental health treatment system through small steps like allowing students to use mental health as an excusable absence to changing other policies with other lawmakers. To begin the process of understanding mental health and mental illness in immigrant and refugee communities, it's important to understand the stressful situations and barriers they experience when coming to the U.S. Immigrants and refugees often experience language and cultural barriers that prevent them from navigating American institutions, especially the mental health system, effectively. To start breaking down the cultural and language barriers, many new immigrants and refugees take ESL classes along with working and providing for their families. Not only do they have to navigate the culture for themselves, but they also have to raise their children in unfamiliar territory. On the flip side, first-generation Americans or young immigrants and refugee kids are faced with the difficulties of navigating two different cultures, their parents' culture at home and the American culture everywhere else. The cultural differences and mounting expectations often leave these children struggling with school and social life, as these kids are often bullied and discriminated against by teachers and their fellow students. The immigrant and refugee parents of said kids may not be able to protect or assist their children at school because they may not be able to communicate effectively with their teachers. Other significant difficulties that face immigrant and refugee families is the inability to secure housing and jobs. It's much more difficult for refugees and immigrants to find and secure employment that will treat and pay them fairly. Part of the difficulty is immigrants and refugees may have achieved a high level of education and job position in their home countries, but they have trouble finding similar positions in the United States. The fewer job opportunities are due to employers usually picking workers with U.S. degrees over that of workers with foreign degrees or certification. Not only are they discriminated against by their education, but they're also discriminated against based on their race and/or ethnicity. Employers may also exploit individual workers because immigrant and refugee workers are often given lower paying and less desirable positions, especially undocumented immigrants. The same exploitation occurs when it comes to finding housing for immigrants and refugees. Landlords may apply excessive and expensive fees to certain services, forcing them to live in unlivable conditions. Language barriers, cultural barriers, and unfamiliarity with laws makes them susceptible to these conditions and scams. Combating these issues requires access to services, but it's still difficult for immigrants and refugees to receive the necessary help. Illegal immigrants are afraid of deportation when accessing certain services, so they avoid doing it altogether. Legal immigrants who seek help still face difficulties as they must deal with language barriers, limited transportation, and issues with taking time off of work. Even if they manage to receive help, service providers and professionals do not possess the linguistic and cultural sensitivity to address their needs adequately. The lack of culturally and linguistically appropriate services is the case when it comes to seeking mental health services. Immigrants and refugees face heightened stressful situations, impoverished conditions, and xenophobia, as well as racism. The stress of the resettlement process, cultural and language barriers, institutional bias and discrimination, and traumatic experiences sharply increase their mental health issues. Consequently, anxiety, depression, PTSD, sleep, behavioral problems, substance abuse, suicidal thoughts, and other mental illnesses are exacerbated by these harsh situations. Moreover, these mental disorders appear and are expressed differently by immigrants and refugees, so it makes it harder for service providers to offer help when they lack culturally and linguistically sensitive services, like interpreters. In addition to the lack of culturally and linguistically responsive services, there is a lack of racially and ethnically diverse mental health workers who would be able to work with potential immigrant and refugee clients. The lack of resources doesn't end with service providers. The lack of access to transportation, childcare, and medical assistance further prevents immigrants and refugees from seeking help. Not only are there issues with the services themselves and accessing services, but immigrants and refugees seeking help may also not feel safe enough to trust the system and providers to help them face their mental health issues. Also, there is a fear surrounding how seeking help may affect their status and job prospects. Despite a dire need for mental health services for immigrant and refugee communities, mental health and mental illness are still stigmatized within their community. Emotions are either dismissed or considered signs of weakness in both men and women. The belief behind the response to emotions is that an individual should be able to pick themselves up and push themselves towards achieving their idea of the American dream. Moreover, mental illness is seen as a sign that one is either crazy or possessed by a demon in specific communities. Mental disorders are then something that must be expelled from an individual's body for them to go back to being quote-unquote normal. In addition to these beliefs, the prevalence of mental health awareness in the United States makes immigrant and refugee community members believe that mental illness is an American concept or made up. These stigmas and perceptions have made it extremely difficult for immigrant and refugee members of such communities to begin the steps towards seeking mental health help. Mental illness is a significant issue not only across the United States, but it's also a significant issue in most immigrant and refugee communities. It's essential to address the barriers and stigmas that face immigrants and refugees daily that may prevent them from receiving help. Let's work together to make sure we're providing culturally and linguistically relevant services for our LA immigrant and refugee community.